Well, hello there. This is Joe Van Cleve. Good day and welcome to the results from Typing Assignment number 8. Okay, stay tuned. You know, some of these assignments we've been doing have kind of taken us out of our comfort zone and forced us to write things that we might not be used to writing. But this assignment, which is writing about in the style or in the vein of, or in honor of, homage to one of our favorite authors, this assignment was more like we are entering familiar ground for us, and yet at the same time, the challenge is to do our favorite author justice, to try to make as good of a piece as possible. At least that's the challenge I felt, that for the author that I chose, I wanted it to be a good piece. I wanted it to do honor to that author. So I know just from the comments, emails, etc., that I received from some of you, I know that this was a challenging assignment for you guys. It's, you know, and part of the challenge of this whole series all along has been in keeping it to within a page or so. And so I understand the difficulty in that for sure. And you guys did great again on this assignment. So without any further ado, let's get into the slideshow for Typing Assignment 8. You know, one of the fun things for me about this assignment was that although I was familiar by name with almost all the authors that you guys were inspired by, I didn't actually know enough about some of them to talk or refer to them or to understand where your pieces were coming from without a little bit of research on my own. And so the fun part of this assignment for me was doing a little bit of online research about these authors, so I knew their background and their genre and et cetera. So a little bit about their work from a Cliff's Notes, if you will, higher level view. So that was fun for me because I did feel like I learned something in researching for this video. So the first piece was by Andrew Nichols, and this was called She Knew Too Much. And this was in the style of Raymond Chandler, the great hard-boiled detective novelist. And Andrew wrote his piece on an Olympia Traveler Deluxe S, and I really thought that he did a great job with this, with the characterization in the style of Chandler, the dames and the private dick and the mentioning of the mob. And I like the period that this was written in. The way it was written, you could tell this was Los Angeles in just post-World War II era. So you did a really good job with this. I could really see myself there in the late 1940s, Los Angeles, Southern California area. And I really like the surprise ending, that nuclear fusion and the potential end of humanity thread in the end of that. It was really fun. That was a great piece, Andrew. I really enjoyed it. Okay, the second piece in our series here was by Matthew Gilman. And Matthew, if I'm not mistaken, you are a new participant to this project, so welcome. And you wrote your piece, Surviving Hurricane in Trump's America, in the style of Hunter S. Thompson, the great gonzo journalist himself. And you wrote your piece on a 1938 Royal KMM, a classic piece of typing iron. Your piece reminds me very much, of course, of Hunter S. Thompson's screeds against the Nixon administration during his time. It's interesting that in my reading of Hunter S. Thompson, I know that he gained notoriety at the time. I'm speaking of late 60s to early 70s. He gained notoriety in the pages of Rolling Stone magazine for his style of journalism that was very much different from the mainstream journalism of the time. But I think he didn't really achieve a lot of acclaim as a writer beyond the world of journalism until a number of years had passed, and we could kind of look back on the time of Richard Nixon and the turmoil of the late 1960s and early 1970s with a little bit more historical perspective. And I think your piece works really good in the vein of Hunter S. Thompson's anti-Nixon writings, but the one thing it lacks, obviously, is the historical perspective, because we're still in the era of President Trump. So I enjoyed it, and I'm really interested to see how your piece might work in another 10 years, let's say, how it might fare. And it is kind of interesting, you know, you wonder about journalism in general. How will today's journalists, how will their writings fare in the decades to come as Hunter S. Thompson's did post the Nixon era? So that brings up a lot of issues, Matthew, and you did really well in yours, and welcome to the typing assignments. Thank you. Okay, the third piece was by David Randall, and he wrote his in the style of Terry Pratchett, and he wrote it on a Sears citation. And your piece, David, was very Pratchett-esque, or very Pratchett-like. I like that it was humorous, and it was postmodern in style, I thought, because it had, although it has the touch of fantasy obviously to it, but there's kind of the non-traditional context, I think, because, you know, there's the mention of the newspapers and things, more of a modern context to the fantasy, which I thought was really neat. And there's a lot of satire in your piece, and so I really enjoyed it. And also a little bit of research on my part I haven't read Terry Pratchett, so again, another piece of knowledge that I learned in studying him, and I might have to go read some Terry Pratchett. Thank you, David. Darren Sundstrom wrote his piece in the style of, I'm assuming, Raymond Chandler. It's a hard-boiled detective character. He didn't directly say who it was written in the style of, and I'm assuming it's sort of a Chandler-esque style. You wrote yours on a 1951 Underwood rhythm touch, and I really liked this vignette. This made for a great intro to a larger story. It almost reads like it's a first page of a finished novel. That's how good it was. And the first thing I thought after reading it was, I wish there was more. I wish you had single-spaced and then you could have written more. But then thinking about it again, I realized, well, if you single-spaced it, you might be able to fit another half page of words in there, but you wouldn't really be able to delve too much more into the story in another half page. So I thought you left off as the intro vignette, the intro scene, really well, and that worked really well, and I think it was Raymond Chandler, or at least somebody like him. Thank you very much, Darren. I really enjoyed that piece. Diane Mayer's piece was written in the homage to Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough, and she wrote it on an XL 2000 Smith Corona, and then this might have been one of the only there was another electric typewriter, a couple electric typewriters in this episode. So this was a really sweet personal letter from Jaro and Elliot the cats to Diane, and it's really good personification of these characters. What I really liked about it is how your piece gets to the inner emotion of the characters, and it really reflects on the importance of human kindness, which is something that we tend to skip over. But I really felt the emotion in this. It was really sweet. And I also thought, in relation to that, your choice of using a script font wheel was really a good choice for this, because it fit well with the emotion of the piece. So I really enjoyed it, Diane. Thank you. And John Monroe's piece was titled Bitter Words, and this was written in the style of Leonard Cohen, and it was written on an Olivetti letter of 22. And I had to do a little bit of research on Leonard Cohen, and I realized how much I need to expand my horizons. Of course, I know about Leonard Cohen, but I didn't realize his such a vast discography of music and songwriting, and also, of course, of his writings. What a great talent he was. I can hear in this poem, which I'm really thinking is a song, not just a poem, but I can almost hear Judy Collins singing it the way she sung Leonard Cohen's Suzanne. I can kind of hear her voice in that. There is a lot of bitter lament in this poem or this song, and yet what I thought was interesting about it is there's such a contemporary motif to the work. You speak of the internet, you use the phrase geeks and nerds and screens, referring to electronic devices and texting. I thought that was so refreshing. It is so contemporary, and I really enjoyed that, John. Thank you. Okay, Kevin Kittel wrote his story Consequential Whole in the vein of Ray Bradbury, and he wrote it on a 1978 IBM Correcting Selectric 2, the other electric typewriter this week. This was really fun. And I like these kind of real-world views of the future. As a techie person myself, I am employed in a tech field, a high-tech field. And I like how you describe the problems and the bugs, and that only an experienced technical person can really appreciate. And that brings to mind a sidelight, which is one of the things that drives me batty about action movies is that everything goes right. I mean, you would, realistically, in a car chase movie like Bullet, when the car takes the first jump and lands on its front wheels, you would expect the entire front suspension to be broken. And I would love to see a movie that does that, that actually shows the real problems that happen to technology. You go back to the 1960s TV series Star Trek, you had Mr. Spock on his back underneath his console trying to fix his computer wiring or whatever the heck it was from a 1960s perspective. But anyway, I really enjoyed this. And I loved the metric versus British standard fine thread conundrum. That was so hilarious. And it also, because it reminds me of the true life story of the Mars Climate Orbiter space probe that was sent to orbit around Mars. And because of a software programming error where the contractors erroneously used pound-second units of force instead of Newton seconds, and the probe disintegrated instead of being a successful mission. So there is some real life reference in your story, Kevin. I really liked it. And also I was thinking, though, about in the very end of it where he didn't have the right size wrench to tighten up the bolt. I was thinking, this is why you always need to carry a crescent wrench, an adjustable wrench. Oh, that was fun. Okay, David Carnelli's work was called Moon Life, and it was written in the style of Philip K. Dick, and he wrote it on a 1941 Remington Rand Streamliner. What a classic machine that is. This is a real Dickensian, dystopian relationship between technology and humans, and you know, it reminds you of Blade Runner, but it's the opposite of Blade Runner, I think, in a sense that the film Blade Runner, of course, was based on Dick's short story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? But instead of the androids returning to Earth to try to find immortality or longer life and find their maker, it's really about the the robots are getting revenge on the humans. They're enslaving them. And that, in turn, reminds me, just this last week, I was doing some YouTube watching of Elon Musk, who, if you might be aware, is the CEO of several companies, including SpaceX and Tesla. But he has made some very poignant warnings as of late about the dangers of artificial intelligence, existential dangers to the human species. And your piece, David, boy, it parallels that really closely. I really enjoyed this. I guess I kind of do enjoy sci-fi. And there was quite a bit of sci-fi in this project this week. Michael Rasmussen's piece is entitled Implant Messengers, and it was written on a Hermes 3000. And this was the second piece in this video where I didn't exactly know who the author was that you were writing in honor of, but it's obviously science fiction, and it's probably more my fault for not being more well-read. I think I sense William Gibson in here, and I also sense Philip K. Dick, both of these. But I like in this story how you use the reference to a paperback book. It's a literary device in the story. These young teenagers are obsessing over this old antique paper book technology, having fun with it. But it's also a device for referencing back to how this story speaks of a future civilization and how it might be. It's an old sci-fi novel foretelling what their time frame will be like. And it involves implanted data as a form of steganography. And if you don't know what steganography is, that means instead of encrypting data, where you know there's data there, but you can't read it, steganography conceals the data, so you don't even know there's a message being sent. And that's what this is. Humans are being used as they get data implanted in them, and then they are physical couriers, like in the ancient Roman Empire, when couriers would travel across, the Roman Empire carrying a physical message, maybe tattooed on their scalp, and their hair would grow out, and that would be a concealed message. That kind of an idea. There is, though, an interesting contemporary context to your piece, Michael, and that is in the post-Edward Snowden revelations about data and the insecurity of our internet-connected data, because you mentioned that directly in the story, that internet-connected data was essentially insecure, and the only way to secure it is physical. And that's what this story involves. Your piece is also very cinematic. It's a visual cinematic piece, the way you describe it. I can see the images on the screen. And I like the fast pacing and the terse verbiage of the piece, which kind of reminds me of William Gibson also. But you did a really good job, Michael. I enjoyed it. Thank you. Kevin Anderson, Andy Kev's piece was written in the vein of David McCullough, and he wrote it on a Smith Corona Coronet Automatic 12. The third electric typewriter in this week. So this was really fun. This was a wonderful true-to-life biography of aviation legend Burt Rutan. And you don't really know that until you get down to the bottom of the story. But this kind of hit a couple personal buttons for me. First of all, my next oldest brother was a model airplane fanatic when he was young, and me being just a year younger than him, I was a hangers-on. I was peripherally interested in model airplanes, and I read all the magazines and knew a lot about it, but I just never flew. And then also, one of my favorite books is John McPhee's The Deltoid Pumpkin Seed, which is a wonderful book about the story of the Ariane Corporation, how they were trying to make a kind of a deltoid-shaped hybrid airship, kind of an aircraft. And in that book, he has a biography of this legendary model aircraft builder named John Kukan. And John Kukan's early story, how he got into model airplanes, parallels Burt Rutan's so well. I enjoyed that so much. And it also reminds me, peripherally, that I think that today, 2017, children, at least in the United States, don't have the hands-on hobbies that maybe I had in my growing up years. A lot of public schools don't teach shop, hands-on physical skills anymore. And so kids don't have as much exposure to building and making things. We're more a society of consumers rather than makers or doers. At least that's what it looks like peripherally. But so I really enjoyed that piece. Very good writing. It was great. Diane Cox, her piece titled Life Goes On, was written in the style and homage to Bill Bryson. And it was written on a Hermes 3000. And her piece is a Bill Bryson-styled account of a walk through her neighborhood in Houston, Texas, post-Hurricane Harvey. And first of all, I'm glad to hear that your property and wasn't any more damaged than it was, Diane, and that you and your family fared well. I like your telescopic view of things, and it's very Bill Bryson-like, how you go from the walk in your neighborhood at the local level to in the immediate level to the global and the geologic time frame. So in the micro sense, you're talking about the small baby squirrel you came across in your walk, and then in the macro sense, you're talking about the 10,000 years it takes to fossilize bones and how few dead animals end up as fossils. And so there's also this self-referential thing in your story where your story is written in the style of Bill Bryson, but in that you're actually referencing directly his works as recommended reading. So you did a really good job, multiple parallel things going on there, and in such a compact piece. You did so well. Ira Stone, I really enjoyed your piece. It's called The Adventure of the Sequestered Seamstress, and it's written in the style of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, a Sherlock Holmes mystery, and he wrote it on a Royal Epic typewriter. And this was a classic Holmes mystery solved in the classic Holmesian way, and you had really good characterizations of both Holmes and Watson, and even mentioning his little problem with the 7% solution involving opium. There's always that thread of the background of, will he fall back into his habit because of his boredom? But you wove the story really nicely, and you resolved the solution all in a single page so well. You did really good, and I can see your enthusiasm for the Holmes stories in this. You did really well. And lastly is a piece I wrote that is in the, I don't know if it's in the style, it's not really in the style of, but it's inspired by science fiction author William Gibson. This was an excerpt from a unfinished novelette that I started back a few years ago. And I just sort of sat down at this Brother Charger 11 with the roll of paper attached to the back, and the blue thing was a little thing to prop this up so you see it better. Anyway, I sat in bed with this on my lap and I wrote that thing out just from memory, just remembering little vignettes of that story. And it's a post-apocalyptic Albuquerque in the future, and there has been a nuclear war, a limited nuclear exchange, and the government has changed, and there's total surveillance, and this character, Morris, has gotten himself involved in a underground movement that's afoot. And it talks about the technology that he uses, his tri-wheeler vehicle, and his little surveillance stuff that he's cobbled together to be able to monitor things going on. It's kind of written in inspiration by William Gibson, but it's not in his style. And the reason why I say that is because William Gibson is much more efficient and terse with his use of language. He uses, barely the words he needs to say what he wants to do. Where I'm all wordy and I don't know where to stop because I'm not really that good of a writer, but that's what I wrote. Well, I sure enjoyed all of these pieces this week. How fun it was to not only read your stories, but to do a little research, a little background work on who these authors are. Well, you guys did really good, and in the next couple days, I will post the assignment for typing assignment number 9. And until then, you guys stay creative and have yourselves a great day.